I'm Debbie Mytels. I'm a member of this congregation, and we're delighted today to talk with you about our experiences at the Berkeley Bioneers Conference. It's an annual 3-day conference, now held in Berkeley. It started back in 1989. And over the years, I've probably attended about a dozen times. The word Bioneers is, of course, a combination of biological and pioneers. And putting these two concepts together is a prime example of the creativity that abounds during these events. I think I need my glasses. I started attending around 2002 when I worked with a group called the Foundation for Global Community. We set up a Walk Through Time exhibit. It was a series of 200 large, colorful panels illustrating the evolution of life on Earth, from the earliest tiny cells up to and including today's modern civilization. These are part of the themes that Bioneers carry forth. Other parts of their major themes include sustainability, indigenous wisdom, and alternative economics. And in more recent years, they've also put more attention to the role that women play as change agents in society. The morning speakers are typically national names, people like Paul Hawken, Janine Benyus, Bill McKibben. Other well-known speakers have included Naomi Klein, Tom Hartman, John A. Powell, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Amy Goodman, and Frances Moore LePay and her daughter Amy. You often hear them first as participants in an afternoon workshop at the conference before they became famous, and they're talking about a book they've written or research that they're doing. But Bioneers has helped these eco-superstars break into the big time. Bioneers also offers ongoing book publishing, podcasts, and workshops, and you can check out talks by many of the speakers on their website, which is bioneers.org. The main person I wanted to hear this year was Michael Pollan. Currently, he's a professor at UC Berkeley, and he's written 10 books. And in 2010, Time magazine named him as one of the world's 100 most influential people. Pollan is basically a journalist, and his first books were about our human relationship with food. The first time I heard him talk was over 2 decades ago, and it was based on his early bestseller, The Botany of Desire. I love that title. In this book, Pollan explored our relationship with 4 plant species, apples, tulips, cannabis, and potatoes, and how they have changed our human behavior as we have cultivated and expanded their range. He puts forth, as a possibility, the idea that these plants somehow had some sort of agency that encouraged and abetted us humans in helping them evolve into the dominant species that they are today. Think about that a bit. What role did roses play in becoming one of the most cultivated and developed species on the planet? Did they somehow seduce us into planting more of them and developing their wide variety of fragrances, color, and shapes? It's an original idea, and Pollan examines the history of these 4 species to consider this question. Another of his bestsellers was Omnivore's Dilemma, which gives an historical perspective on how humans have obtained food. From hunter-gatherers to today's industrial agriculture, Pollan tells how humans have become increasingly distant from our food, so that, in the words of Wikipedia, quote, industrial eating obscures the crucially important ecological relationships and connections. Instead, Pollan suggests a 3-part rule for healthy nutrition. Eat food, not too much, and mostly plants. Exploring the other things that humans ingest, or maybe it's just because he lives in Berkeley, Pollan then began to explore psychedelics. His book, How to Change Your Mind, delves into the realm of psychoactive substances. He starts by exploring the history of mind-altering plants, and then he jumps in fully and describes his own carefully planned experiences using psychedelics. These experiences then spurred Pollan's curiosity about consciousness. And being a journalist, he's recently turned his questions into yet another book, which is called A World Appears, A Journey into Consciousness. His talk at this year's Bioneers Conference relied heavily on this book, and after hearing his keynote talk, my husband Thomas and I were so intrigued that we went to the afternoon discussion between him and Berkeley psychology professor Dagner Keltner. The two of them appeared to be friends, and their conversation also gave us a great view of Pollan's great sense of humor. Among the ideas they discussed was a question of what is consciousness? And where is it located in the body? And in fact, is it located in the body? Well, there's a growing recognition among scientists that consciousness extends beyond humans to other species, certainly to mammals, and partly to birds and insects, and perhaps even to plants. Well, Pollan believes that having feelings, however, is a major part of being conscious. If consciousness then depends upon having feelings, can a machine be conscious? His answer is no. He does, however, differentiate between sentience, which he considers a simple form of physical awareness, and consciousness itself. Plants are sentient because, even with their limited mobility, their movement is something we can't observe. But they don't seem capable of responding with the complexity that animals can employ. In general, Pollan is coming to understand that there are both types and degrees of consciousness, and that different life forms have evolved in different ways to understand and respond to the world that we share. Like the scientists that he interviews, Pollan is beginning to ask the questions that may elucidate for us what it means to be conscious. I encourage you to read his book and probe these questions more yourself.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Mark Gersh. I'm at least a member of Marina's congregation and a participant in yours. My pronouns are he and him. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Whoops, wrong soliloquy. Wow, for the first time standing up here and addressing the fellowship. I am a junior partner here to share my reflections on attending the Bioneers conference. Junior partner because I've only been to the last two, and Debbie and Marina are the true veterans. My first was the March 2025 event at Berkeley themed Revolution from the Heart of Nature. I went with no expectations as I had never heard of Bioneers other than viewing a poster in Marina's bathroom. Marina explained the organization to me and what a life-changing event attending the conference would be for me. I must admit, I was a bit apprehensive, wondering if I might feel out of place, knowing I've grown up right of center, and while I love nature, I didn't necessarily consider myself a tree hugger. Marina and I had been dating for 4 months, and as I could tell, the organization and conference meant a lot to her. I agreed to go, not only to score points, but by then I had already fallen in love with her, and I wanted to learn more about what touched her soul and spirit. Nice response. The event brought together visionary leaders, activists, and professionals to explore climate concerns, restorative food systems, nature-inspired solutions, rights of nature, indigeneity, women's and youth leadership, and social justice initiatives. Wow, I was blown away by the broadness of the topics, passion of the participants, intellectualism of the speakers, and genuine friendliness shown by everyone. The atmosphere and creativity was intoxicating, and as it turns out, Berkeley has some great restaurants that we visited for both lunch and dinner. Among the many speakers and topics I found most fascinating included a discussion on biomimicry, or how solutions to various problems can be inspired by how nature itself solves challenges. I had actually studied and employed such ideas while at Lockheed Martin, as we created new spacecraft structures based upon a bee's honeycombed hive, or how to have flocks of small satellites autonomously interact with each other like a murmuration of birds. It was fascinating to learn that the living world has countless models we can learn from, putting our species into better harmony with the rest of nature. These solutions show us the way to meet our needs and evolve and create new possibilities. By emulating these time-tested forms, processes, and ecosystems, humans practicing biomimicry can unleash a regenerative future where we can help create conditions conducive to all life. Another fascinating set of topics included an Indigenous forum that addressed historical crises like the Klamath River Dam's effect on salmon and Indigenous people, intergenerational healing led by matriarchs, and native ecological wisdom to repair nature, all examples of how we can learn from others, this time with cultural perspectives. This year, I actively advocated going to their 37th annual Bioneers Conference, held in late March in Berkeley, and it did not disappoint. Again, absolutely outstanding, insightful talks by tremendous speakers. Standouts included Ferris Jabber, who talked on Becoming Earth, how our planet came to life, showcased how Earth and life continually co-evolve, and that together they form a single, interconnected living system. Julian Brave Noisecat used Indigenous storytelling to dramatically relate the epic misadventures of the trickster coyote, to shed light on our current global chaos and possible paths forward in these trying times that focus on local kinship, community, and ecological connection. Like the trickster coyote, we must acknowledge the wreckage of our current mistakes, laugh at our arrogance, pick up the pieces, and actively choose to survive the night. Leah Penniman and Raj Patel, who both gave separate talks about food injustice, and then later came together for a very compelling panel conversation on food justice from the local to the global, where they explored how even in this reactionary period, we can build effective movements to regenerate our soils, ecosystems, ancestral cultures, and communities, and nourish our bodies and souls. Perhaps the most thought-provoking talk was by Michael Pollan, who spoke about consciousness, not only the scientific of how and why we are conscious, but more importantly, the emotional and spiritual element of being conscious and how to practice it fully in our daily lives. Knowing what I have come to learn about Unitarian Universalists, I was surprised that I didn't see more UUs from this congregation at Bioneers, as all the themes embrace and literally drip with the Unitarian Universalist values of pluralism, justice, interdependence, equity, transformation, generosity, and love. For example, I note that Gigi's email signature block says, Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Redwood City, a community of spiritual growth, compassion, and justice. It could easily be a Bioneers tagline. The Bioneers Conference website summarizes the essence of my experiences quite well. And I quote, "For 37 years, the Bioneers Conference has been a gathering place for those working to defend the web of life and build a more just, life-honoring world. The challenges we face are immense and ongoing, but every step forward matters, especially in difficult times. This March in Berkeley, connect with visionary thinkers and doers, activists, scientists, artists, educators, Indigenous leaders, community organizers, and more, who are shaping solutions to address the most critical issues of our time through inspiring talks, deep discussions, hands-on workshops, the world-renowned Indigenous Forum, youth programs, art and performance, and countless opportunities for collaboration. Bioneers 2026 will reignite our shared energy, creativity, and commitment to change. It's never been more important to harness our collective wisdom, connections, and resilience to build the future we want to see. You can bet that Bioneers 2027 will be just as compelling. I hope to see you there."
Good morning. They already covered all the good stuff. When I first attended Bioneers Conference in the early 2000s, I expected to hear from environmentalists, scientists, and policy wonks. I did hear from them, but it was also so much more. The amazing diversity of voices has changed me and my sense of what's possible. At first, a scientist might come out to explain new research on climate change in a keynote talk, and then next up on stage would be a musician, a dance troupe, or an Indigenous storyteller. At first, I thought that was the entertainment between the real presentations, but I came to realize that it's presenting another way of knowing. Looking at design, the biologist Janine Benyus, as Mark mentioned, wrote the book Biomimicry. She works with companies who have challenges like, we need to move water more efficiently, or we want to reduce the drag on a train. And she asks the question, How has nature already solved this problem? Looking at nature to design an elegant solution. The industrial model of production is called cradle to grave. We extract raw materials, make products, use them, and then throw them away in a landfill. In the natural world, one organism's waste is another's resource. Architect William McDonough asked why human products couldn't also work that way. He wrote the book Cradle to Cradle, looking at designing products so that at the end of the life cycle, every material becomes the beginning for another. Waste becomes food. Some companies are now adopting those principles, but 20 years ago, this was revolutionary. He worked with a textile mill whose wastewater was so toxic, it had to be treated as hazardous waste. By redesigning every dye and chemical in the process for making the carpets and the fabrics, they eventually produced water cleaner leaving the factory than it was entering. Fish could live in it. Paul Stamets, the mushroom guru, some of you might have heard of, he brought public attention to the medicinal use of mushrooms and was one of the first advocates for seeing fungi as the connective tissue of forests, which I think we're all familiar with now. He also pioneered the use of mushrooms to clean up environmental toxins such as oil spills. When I first saw him speak, he had just gotten a grant from Bioneers, and he was literally living in a house that was falling down. And now many of you have probably heard of Paul Stamets. Van Jones, before he was a talking head on MSNBC, connected climate action with social justice. He saw unemployed young black men in Oakland and roofs without solar panels and asked, what if these problems could solve each other? His initiative was called Green Jobs for All. And Chief Oren Lyons of the Haudenosaunee Nation spoke about democracy. I learned that democracy didn't spring from the heads of our founding fathers. There were elaborate forms of governance here already, and they included values we struggle with. Chief Lyons spoke about 3 aspects that our democracy is missing that was in the Haudenosaunee governance, beginning every meeting with gratitude, giving power to the women elders to choose the leaders who are chosen for life, and every decision taking into account the 7 generations. I want to share 2 specific stories that continue to live in my brain and inspire me. About 20 years ago, I saw members of the Yurok tribe describe their work to protect the Klamath River. They view the health of the river not as an environmental concern, but as intrinsic to the health of their community. The river used to be so thick with salmon that during the spawning season, you could walk across the river on the backs of the fish. But when 4 hydroelectric dams were put in by the power company, they watched the water dry to a trickle and watched the salmon struggling with sickness and disease. In 2002, the power company didn't release enough water during the spawning season, and the tribes watched 50 to 75,000 salmon die before they reached the breeding ground. It was tragic. It really touched my heart, but I didn't have a lot of hope that they were going to be able to win against this big power company. But you may have heard the news. The Klamath dams were dismantled just within the last few years. And within months, the salmon were swimming upstream to places they hadn't been seen in decades. I was so surprised to realize that this little tribe had this big win against a power electric company. And then there was Thomas Lindsay. I saw him in a breakout session in the early 2000s. He was a young, baby-faced lawyer from Pennsylvania trying to help this rural town protect themselves from the large corporate hog farms moving in and polluting the streams and the groundwater. He found that the law didn't really give communities the ability to say no. So after several procedural wins, but no actual wins, he started thinking and proposed what sounded like an impossible idea. What if rivers, forests, and ecosystems had legal rights? Could there be a law that recognized a river's right to be unpolluted? At the time, I remember thinking, yay, an idealist. But that's not going to happen in my lifetime. It only took 5 years. 5 years later, he had drafted the first rights of nature laws in the world. They were adopted by many rural communities in Pennsylvania, and it triggered a global movement of communities, tribal nations, and governments around the world passing laws that recognize that natural ecosystems have the right to flourish. Long before court cases and laws, of course, Indigenous peoples understood that the natural world is not property to be owned, but a community of living relatives deserving of respect and reciprocity. Perhaps the deepest way that Bioneers influences me is not by teaching me new facts, but by stretching my thinking about where wisdom lives. Some truths are carried in scientific research, others in story, ceremony, dance, art, in trees, rivers, and fish. As the Bioneers co-founder, Nina Simons, likes to say, it's all relatives. If you're inspired by this talk and you would like to follow up, you have a couple of options. There's the Bioneers.org website. You can scan the QR code that will take you to their podcast. They have amazing stories of inspiration on their podcast. And also, as you can tell, Mark and Debbie and I are so enthusiastic about what they're doing that we're talking about maybe leading a group in the fall of people that are interested in watching a plenary session and having a discussion. And maybe that becomes something that we do on a regular basis, because I think we could all use more inspiration and hope.
I have a prayer to offer. This prayer was written by Reverend Tara Landers, and she is a Unitarian Universalist minister who is involved in the Unitarian Universalist animal ministry. So this is right up my alley. So please join me in the spirit of prayer and meditation. Breath of life and breath of love, we enter this time of prayer, acknowledging that our human stories intersect with the stories of animals. The watershed that sustains us sustains all life around us. We ask that our awareness expand to all the ways that we share this land with non-human life. Help us stretch beyond the human-worn patterns of movement and to notice more fully the path of the ravens overhead, the bob of the coyotes through the brush. May we heed the part of our shared story that warns of our climate emergency, an emergency that threatens not just human life, but all of creation. Remind us that we share a kinship with non-human animals. Help us turn away from an extractive culture that views animals as a resource to be bought or used up, and instead help us fully acknowledge the gifts of these creatures of the earth and sky. In return for the gifts they share, let us give the gift of doing all we can to fight the climate crisis and chart a new way, a way of living in relationship with great care for all life around us. Please join me in a few moments of silence.